Hello, listeners, and welcome to Health Talk Radio Africa. I am your host, Dr. Mary Mugambi. Listeners, a few weeks ago, I was invited to a workshop for young couples who wanted to know how they could prepare for conception, pregnancy, and parenthood. Together with an obstetrician, we had a great time interacting with the young people. After the workshop, there was a social hour where we sat down for a meal together and socialized. That's when a majority of young couples took out their e-cigarettes. To our shock and horror, for the rest of the evening, the young couples continued to vape heavily, literally chain smoking the e-cigarettes for hours. The obstetrician and I just looked at each other and our hearts sank. Clearly, the young couples had not internalized the message that e-cigarettes are just as dangerous as regular tobacco cigarettes. They thought that e-cigarettes are a safer option to regular tobacco cigarettes. Even worse, they destroy the fertility of a man and a woman. And these young couples wanted to be parents. Listeners, in this episode, as part of our fertility series, we explore how smoking e-cigarettes, known as vaping, affects male fertility. We acknowledge that the e-cigarettes are marketed and offered to young people around the age of 14 and 15 years old. However, to comply with streaming and broadcasting regulations, we urge parents to listen to this episode with their teenagers, young men, and women. Listeners, we all have seen the glamorous actors on television, movies, smoking an e-cigarette. The e-cigarettes are known by several names such as vapes, electronic nicotine delivery systems, otherwise known as ENDS. Research is now revealing that the e-cigarettes are just as dangerous as regular tobacco cigarettes. The damage is often not reversible, especially on the male and female fertility. So, listeners, what are e-cigarettes, otherwise known as vapes? E-cigarettes are battery-powered devices. They have a reservoir holding a liquid. Inside, they have an atomizer which generates heat, like a coil, to heat the liquid. The heat makes the liquid change into an aerosol, which is inhaled. The liquid in e-cigarettes contain two compounds called propylene glycol and vegetable glycerin. These two compounds are food additives and are not toxic to humans when consumed orally. The problem begins when this e-liquid is heated by the coil inside or the atomizer. The heated e-liquid emits 7 compounds that are toxic to the body's nervous, immune, and reproductive systems. The toxic compounds are acetaldehyde, acrolein, benzylaldehyde, benzene, toluene, ethylbenzene, and xylene. Other compounds added to the e-liquid make the e-cigarettes even more toxic to the human body. Nicotine and flavoring agents are added. When heated, they release an aerosol. Nicotine and the different flavoring agents all affect male fertility in several ways. We will talk about this shortly. Nicotine and flavoring agents are added. When heated and released as an aerosol, nicotine and these different flavoring agents affect male fertility in several ways. We will talk about this shortly. The heating process of the e-liquid and the different hardware components of the e-cigarette releases a long list of heavy metals that are also inhaled by the smoker. Small particles of metals such as lead, nickel, chromium, aluminium, iron, copper, silver, zinc, tin, manganese, together with the ceramic and silica particles, are all inhaled by the smoker. Listeners, the worst part is that every component in the e-cigarette destroys the fertility of the male. Let us find out how. Listeners, the heavy metal particles that are released during the heating of the e-liquid and the hard components of the e-cigarette affect the sperm of the male. The heavy metal particles drastically reduce the sperm count. They reduce the ability of the sperm to swim and function. This drastically reduces the man's fertility and chances of fatherhood. Let us look more closely at the nicotine. E-cigarettes or vaping devices are made with nicotine, while others are made nicotine-free. Both the nicotine and nicotine-free vaping devices are equally detrimental to male fertility. The devices with nicotine have nicotine salts. When heated, the nicotine is absorbed rapidly into the bloodstream of the smoker. And to quote a young smoker, it delivers a smooth throat hit at high doses. High doses. Sadly, the nicotine in e-cigarettes reach concentrations many times higher than the tobacco cigarettes. Listeners, how does high nicotine levels affect a man? Nicotine is a powerful vasoconstrictor. That simply means it makes the blood vessels very tight. This impairs sexual function, resulting in erectile function. The man cannot maintain an erection. Research has also found out that the more nicotine is in the blood, the lower the sperm count or sperm concentration. Nicotine drastically reduces production of testosterone. Remember, listeners, the male sexual organs and function of the testicles are all controlled by testosterone hormone. Nicotine also destroys the cells that make the sperm. The cells that make the sperm slough off, die off. The tissues inside the testicles, known as seminiferous epithelium, epididymis, also completely change their cell structure. The result is a low sperm count. Even worse, the sperm have less swimming ability. The sperm are not viable. Worst is that the sperm fertilizing ability is destroyed. A huge percentage of the sperm have abnormalities. To say it bluntly, nicotine completely interferes with the process of fertilization. The sperm cannot fertilize an egg. The result? An infertile man. No fatherhood. No fatherhood. What if there is no nicotine in the e-cigarettes, you're wondering? The flavoring agents are equally toxic. Listeners, there are more than 8,000 documented commercial flavors and 500 brands of e-cigarettes or vapes and counting. The flavors are what attract the young people to smoking e-cigarettes. Examples of flavors are cherry crush, mint, grapes, bubblegum, green apple, vanilla cannoli, menthol, cinnamon, and hundreds of others. When consumed orally, these flavoring agents are harmless. They're harmless. But when heated in the e-liquid of a vaping device, these flavoring agents are cancer-causing or carcinogenic and teratogenic. They cause defects in the fetus. When inhaled, these flavoring agents enter the bloodstream in concentrations 1,000 times higher than when consumed orally in food. Cinnamon and bubblegum are the flavors that have been heavily researched. Listeners, bubblegum flavor damages the cells that are responsible for making sperm in the testicles. Cinnamon flavor damages the flagellum or the tail of the sperm, destroying its ability to swim. Red fruit aroma decreases the weight of the testicles and reduces production of the steroid testosterone. If the vaping device has both nicotine and a flavoring agent, there is the combined effect of nicotine and the flavoring agent. The man's fertility is drastically reduced, and so are his chances at fatherhood. Listeners, the damaging compounds do not end with nicotine and flavoring agents. There are the vapors that are produced when the e-liquid is heated. Those fumes, they too cause damage to the man. At the beginning of this podcast, listeners, we stated that the vapors have 7 toxic compounds. 4 of those are highly carcinogenic or cancer-causing. They are benzene, ethylbenzene, toluene, and styrene. These compounds cause irritation, headaches, they damage the liver, kidney, and central nervous system. Listeners, these compounds change the structure of the testicles. They change sexual behavior and damage the sperm ability to swim. Listeners, you may have noticed that there are low voltage e-cigarettes. The assumption is that the less heat produced by the vaping device, less damage is done to the smoker. Oh, that is a wrong assumption. Low voltage devices still show damage to the structure of the testicles, damaged cells in the tissues of the testicles, and reduced testosterone production. The man's fertility is totally compromised. Listeners, in all fairness, when my team and I were putting together information for this episode, 2 questions kept nagging at us. The first question was, how can humans make, market, and sell devices that destroy people in such a fundamental way? The second question was, why no person is talking about the triple addiction that the e-cigarettes or vapes cause simultaneously? Vaping devices are destroying our young teenage boys and young men by destroying their reproductive systems. Their chances at fatherhood are being eroded without their knowledge, long before they even think of becoming fathers. The worst is that the damage done is not reversible. Only a few scientists have sounded the alarm of triple addiction with e-cigarettes. The first addiction is to nicotine. Years of research with tobacco and tobacco cigarettes and now e-cigarettes show nicotine addiction is extremely difficult to break. There is enough evidence just how detrimental nicotine is to the human body, organs, and now it's destroying fertility of our young boys and young men long before they think of being parents. The second addiction with e-cigarettes is on the flavors. As stated earlier, there are thousands of flavors for e-cigarettes. These flavoring agents are harmless when eaten orally, but when heated and inhaled, they are completely toxic and cancer-causing. The third addiction, as revealed by teenagers and young people who vape, is being addicted to holding a vape or an e-cigarette and the entire vaping process. These young people reveal the act of vaping is so pleasurable. The e-cigarettes are small, easy to hide inside clothing, school uniforms, school bags, handbags, even within the hair bands of young females. Many look like pens and can be smuggled into schools, colleges, movie theaters, even inside hospital wards. The vapes come in many colors, with some even in the shape of lipsticks and candy bars. Listeners, please let me beg you to share this episode with your family, friends, and people in your communities. For parents of teenage boys and young men, please sit down and listen to this podcast with them. The manufacturers of the vaping devices have cunning ways to market the e-cigarettes to our young boys and men. What the researchers and manufacturers know but will not state is that once addicted to the e-cigarettes, stopping or quitting is next to impossible. Remember, listeners, as part of our fertility series, there is a podcast on how e-cigarettes affect female fertility. An episode you also do not want to miss. Listeners, that's all I have for you in this episode of Health Talk Radio Africa. If you have a health or nutrition problem, please challenge us to get a solution for you. We will bring in other experts if need be. I always welcome your comments on this program. Just drop me an email at healthtalkradioafrica@gmail.com. Please subscribe and share this episode with friends and family. Help us help other people, your loved ones. Until next time, listeners, eat healthy so you can live healthy. Bye. Bye for now. Bye-bye.